The story follows Susan, a teenage girl, as she develops a relationship with Raphael, a theater actor, in the opening scene. We see the protagonist, Susan. She sits among her friends, uninterested in their conversation, and in her own world her friends continue to gossip about their peers and discuss their business, while Susan keeps her head low, bored out of her mind. She takes the straw and starts drawing on the table with red liquid. Taking one last sip, she gathers her stuff and heads home. Her friends say goodbye and continue with their gossip, not paying her any attention. Entering the apartment, Susan is greeted by her mother and her siblings. They catch up on their school assignments, and when her sister asks her for help, Susan refuses because she has a lot to do on her own. As she gets to her room, she takes out her wallet and puts it on the dresser. Tired from a long day of school, she decides to lie down a bit as her thoughts come to her the following morning. She enjoys breakfast with her family as they talk about their assignments for the day, and she leaves for school, drowned in her thoughts. She makes her way to school and greets everyone as she arrives. She stands awkwardly before the doors open, and the students crowd in ready for their lessons on her way back from school. Despite being lost in her thoughts, she notices a man smoking by the theater, and he catches her eye. Later in the afternoon, she goes through her closet trying to find something nice to wear, but ends up wearing the usual some jeans and a white t-shirt, heading to the kitchen. She sees her family having lunch, so she grabs a bite. They're discussing boats, so she decides not to intervene. However, as she heads to leave, her father asks her where she's going. She lets them know that she's going to a friend's party, and they're surprised because she never goes out. Her mother rems her to be back before 1, but Susan manages to sweet-talk her way into a later curfew. She arrives at the location of the party, but seems to be stuck at the gate because she doesn't know the passcode. Luckily, some students who are also going to the party come by the entrance and let her in. They all wait for the elevator patiently, not saying a word and creating an awkward atmosphere. The elevator arrives and Susan lets everyone go before her before pushing herself in, last sitting between two classmates. Susan doesn't seem to be fitting into the party, so she decides to make some small talk with the girl sitting next to her, given that the girl is chugging the beer like water. Susan decides to ask her whether she likes beer a lot. The girl not paying attention to, Susan continues to sway her head among the music. Suzanne informs her that she doesn't like beer, but when she notices that the girl isn't interested in a conversation with her, decides to let her take her beer just so she can get rid of it. As the party continues, Susan gets more and more comfortable being around the new environment. She even joins the crowd as they go crazy on the dance floor. Despite being shy, eventually the party fades down, so Susan stands with her classmate. Her classmate asks her to rate the boys that are there, but Susan refuses as she thinks that's horrible. Not holding back, she admits that if she had to rate everyone, she would give everyone a 5 as the party finishes. Suzanne and her classmates walk back home. Suzanne is in the front as the sober one, shushing the drunken girls behind her as they approach a bar. Susan can't help but notice the same man from the previous day, who caught her eye sitting among his friends at the bar. Bored out of his mind, he looks up and notices her staring at him for the first time, embarrassed. Susan runs after her friends who have already taken off the next morning. She passes along the theater and notices the man standing by a red motorcycle while another man seems to be looking at it. The man that Suzanne fancies seems to be upset regardless. She continues home, and as she drinks a glass of water, an idea comes to her mind. So she rushes back to the man, seeing a lady walk by. She asks her whether there's been an accident, so the lady informs her that his bike has broken down in the middle of the night. Susan's father has a snack before returning to bed, but he gets stopped by Susan asking him about motorcycles. He asks him whether a leaking engine is serious, and whether he can replace it, or it would mean needing to buy a new motorcycle, confused by her sudden questions. He lets her know that he has no idea, so she kisses him on the cheek, while wishing him a good night later, hiding behind a tree. She watches the man doing something in front of the theater. An old man calls out his name, and she finds out that it's Raphael. The man scolds him for his acting skills and asks him to be more attentive on stage, so they all go back inside to practice. Susan takes the chance to get closer. Spreading his arms, he puts them above his head to make a big tree, and it makes Susan laugh. However, the director doesn't seem to like it, and that upsets Raphael, so he goes out to smoke as he lights up his cigarette. He notices Susan in the corner, so he gets closer. Given that he's approaching her, she decides to approach him as well, despite being nervous. He asks whether he's seen her around, and she lets him know she passes the theater every day to school. She reveals that she's 16, and informs him that she hasn't seen the play as he asks her about it. The cafe is where he often eats, so he says he reveals that he is 35 and that he used to go to the same school when he was her age. He invites her to see the play sometime. so she takes the chance to ask him whether he likes being in it. Playing on stage is something he loves, but he admits that it could be boring doing the same play every night and saying the same lines over and over. He asks her about school, admitting that she's bored. She opens up about not liking anything about her school, the girls, the boys, the professors. Everything seems so tiring to her as she does her homework back at home. She can't stop thinking about him later in the evening. She sees her dad by himself, and given that he's a man, she asks about his preferences, wanting to impress Raphael. She asks her dad whether he prefers skirts or pants. Skirts are what he prefers because you can see the legs, but he lets her know that he likes pants as well as expected. We see Susan in a miniskirt the following morning, clearly uncomfortable but still thriving. She passes the theater and sees Raphael sitting at the cafe, so she decides to join him, sitting at a table away from him. She opens her book, but he notices her drink first. Susan's drink of choice is always grenadine and lemonade, so decides to take a sip. He ends up liking it, so he orders one for himself. Finally, he asks her about the book. She informs him that she loves novels but likes to read other things as well. He admits to liking reading, but no poetry for him. The drink arrives, and he only takes a few sips before getting up and leaving with a huge smile on her face. She takes his glass and drinks from his straw back at home. She tries changing her appearance by applying some mascara, but that ends up terribly. As she's coming back home from school, she hears her name being called. Seeing Raphael makes her smile, so she heads to greet him. He kisses her, hand in her cheek, and she smiles from ear to ear given that she's coming back from school. He asks her why she always looks so bored, and she reminds him that she doesn't like school, nor people her age, realizing that they're very similar. He wants to get to know her better, so he asks her to have breakfast before school the following morning, to which she agrees on her way back home. She dances along the street, not able to contain her happiness. Finishing another play in the evening, Raphael refuses to go out with his colleagues because he has breakfast in the morning. Both of them are excited to see each other the following morning. We see Susan rushing to get ready and running out of the house. However, she returns and asks her mother for 5 O's. He arrives and they sit awkwardly after he orders bread jam and drinks for them, wanting to show her a world of his own. He asks her whether she likes classical music, as he hands are the headphones he claims that he can never get bored of the song he's about to play for her. As the song begins, we notice that she's enjoying it. They indulge in a simultaneous dance, letting the music connect with their feelings. The connection with him seems to be helping her connect with everyone, as we see her embraced in a hug with her mother as they dance to classical music. As time passes, they get closer and closer to each other. They go out for walks to the cafe and just enjoy spending time together, eating the candy he bought her while reading her book. Susan is asked by her brother whether she wants to join him for dinner. Given that she has plans with Raphael, she lies about going to a party with some friends so as not to get in trouble. Even Raphael stops spending time with his colleagues, as all he does is spend time with Suzanne. She waits for him after the show as he exits the theater with his colleagues. One of them asks Raphael if he's joining them, and he tells him that he will come later. Disappointed, she asks whether he will, but he lets her know that it's just a polite way of saying no. They go to a restaurant for a change, and as they sit looking at each other with lust, he kisses her on the neck, smiling shyly. She takes his hand and caresses it while looking deep into his eyes at school. Susan seems to have changed her quiet girl persona as she tells her friend to shut up in class, as she's asking her different questions about the lecture. Out of all people, her father seems to have noticed her change the most. As they walk down the street, he asks her to confirm that everything is fine, given that she's been miles away, assuming that it's a boy problem. He reminds her that boys her age can be quite stupid, and she agrees late for her date with Raphael. She rushes out of the building only to see Raphael at the entrance with his bike, terrified of her parents seeing her on the scooter. She lets him know that she's not getting on the bike as she's afraid. Instead of making a fuss, he pushes the scooter to the theater where they'll be having their date. As they enter the hall, they head to the stage where they'll be having their second dance. Beautiful classical music plays as they indulge in a dance, this time standing and holding each other. They let the music get to their emotions as they feel each other with their bodies, smoking a cigarette by the window. Something seems to be bothering Raphael. As he runs outside, thinking that he's seen something, he decides to open up to the director, admitting to being afraid that he can't act anymore, not giving it much attention. The director claims that he's only tired and that he should have a chocolate instead of listening to him. Raphael heads to the cafe, and he seems to be looking for somebody. In the evening, he meets with Suzanne and takes her to a party with him. Susan gets into a conversation with the stage's designer, and he nags her about the shapes and colors of the stage and even their true meaning. Luckily, Raphael steals her from him, claiming that Renee wants to see her standing at the bar. The couple looks at each other for a while before he takes her hand for them to dance as they get closer to each other and start slow dancing. They both realize how much they love each other. The slow, romantic music plays in the background as they dance, leaning on each other, given their forbidden love. Susan starts crying into his arms, trying to hide her tears from him. Returning home, her emotions overwhelm her, so she decides to wake up her parents only to ask them how they are. Her worried father wakes up and asks whether there's something wrong, but with a smile on her face, she lets him know that she only wants to check up on them. Finding her behavior odd, he complains to her mother as Susan closes the door, but she doesn't seem to be concerned. Her emotions become too much for her as she feels upset after seeing him. The love she has for him is too strong despite it. Being prohibited sitting on her bed, she feels the lump in her throat as tears start falling themselves. She isn't the only one feeling that way, as we see Raphael spending a lot of time by himself just thinking about the situation concerned. She stands in the corner of the theater before peeking through the glass window to see whether she can spot him. Unfortunately, a worker comes to the theater, snapping her out of her thoughts. And because of him, she leaves the burden of their relationship gets to her, and being unable to take it anymore, she breaks down in front of her. Mother concerned, her mother embraces her in a hug, immediately trying to calm her down. As Susan calms down, she admits everything to her. She lets her mother know that she has fallen in love with an adult, a man who is way older than her, and that he's in love with her as well, not wearing anything. Her mother squeezes her tightly, letting her know that she's there for her, and that she understands without any judgment the reality of their situation. Dawns upon the pair, as well as they seem to be growing apart, not being able to look each other in the eyes. They stare at the ground, standing opposite of each other, breaking the silence. He asks her whether she's all right, and instead of responding, all she does is nod. Being honest with her, he lets her know that she seems to be elsewhere, and she admits that her mind is in another place. However, she doesn't want it to be like that given their situation. She thinks that his mind is elsewhere as well, but he assures her that he's always with her, not knowing what to say next. She decides to head home. He offers to walk her, but she refuses, kissing him on the neck. She slowly walks away from him. The last day of school finally comes, and we see Susan packing her bags while all the students leave. She is the last one to stay. As she packs her books on her way back, she passes the theater for the last time after school, and a big smile grows on her face as she remembers the time she saw Raphael.